Hello, Dawn. Good evening, everyone.
Good morning. Good afternoon, I guess, for you. It's the morning time here.
Oh, yes. Good morning, Dawn. My apologies. Thank you all, guys, for joining on time.
The old,
Our resource person is already here, so I think that since it's already 5 o'clock, we should get started and the others will join us along the way. 1 second, please.
take your time.
Okay.
Do I have the privilege to share the screen now?
Yes, I just shared. I made you host.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you all. A special thank you to Piana for inviting me to share some of my personal journey here as well. I'm a professor of finance mainly, and I did a good chunk of my research work in real estate finance, starting with my PhD dissertation. So over the last almost 4 decades, 3.5 decades, I have taught in different countries, in different continents, and I have published about 40 papers, and I'm currently working on another 5 or 6 with colleagues all over the world. So it has been an interesting and very rewarding journey for me. And when Fiona suggested that I share my experiences with you, young scholars, it's really a great joy, to do so. So I hope you will find what I say useful, and it will open new horizons and doors for you. Uh, and some of the things I will say are very personal. So my experience is not necessarily a universal experience. Just there is an idiosyncratic component to every person and every experience. Having said that, I will also share the following. You will hear similar stories from other colleagues, more senior colleagues, uh, as well. So the story might have a little bit of a different shape and time, but if you really look at the substance of it, it's essentially just a small conversation most of the time that gets us started, into a journey in doing research and publishing it. So with that, let me just share the screen and then put some of my thoughts together in a more formalized manner to your attention. And I am happy to share these uh, notes with Fiona, who can share with all of you later on. Um, okay. So currently I am in Toronto, Canada, and I am chairing the real estate management department, but my background is in finance. So I will cover real estate and finance matters. Um, so I will speak today, on mainly two things, doing research, different aspects of it, and then publishing the research that you do. That's the follow-up. And to me, there is one very important component, this is a must. Without that, whatever you may wish to do, you are not going to go forward fast, and it will be actually a not an enjoyable thing to do. You have to love what you do, and doing research is no exception. In fact, it may be even more important to love doing research than, let's say, playing football or going to the movies and whatnot. This is like a marriage. You really have to love what you are doing. It really is important. Part of it is you have to love inquiring as well as learning new things, because it's a never-ending process. I'm still reading papers that are published, and way back when I was a PhD student, computer did not exist, or it existed barely, and internet did not exist. So some of the things that my colleagues, younger colleagues, are doing today, it wasn't even imaginable for us, for my generation. So for me to appreciate what they are doing, they are born into it. I have to really go and learn new things. I have to really learn new ideas, new methods. So learning must be something that you love, you enjoy. Without that, it will be difficult to keep up with the pace. Keep in mind, this has become a profession uh, that is now one rather than many. What I mean by that is the world has become and is becoming every day smaller and smaller. Years ago, when I wrote a paper, I had to type it, print it, and put it into regular mail and send it to, let's say, my colleague somewhere. It would take 10 days, for 2 weeks for the paper to reach, for them to review and then send it back to me. It would take another month or so. So there was a huge amount of delay. Today, you just click something and it's over in China or anywhere else. The point I am making is competition has increased as a result. Competition for ideas, competition for unearthing new knowledge has increased and intensified. So you really have to be at the cutting edge of what you are doing, and you have to constantly, renew yourself. So love is an essential component of doing research. It's what I am trying to say ultimately, and maybe the most important, because this is a completely different lifestyle. Being an academic is a completely different lifestyle. In some sense, you are foregoing the opportunity to make a lot of money because of your skills. You are highly recruitable in the industry. You could make a lot of money potentially, and you are choosing to be your own boss for a smaller income, but a different lifestyle where you choose your own destiny in terms of your work hours and whatnot. Sometimes I work very hard, 7 days a week. Sometimes I take it easy for a few days. I just say, I'm going to rest. So you are your own boss in this profession, but you really have to love what you do. A second component of essentials is tenacity and dedication, and these are all intermingled, right? You have you have to sometimes quote and unquote if the research paper you are working on itself, or if the referee of a journal would send you a punch, you should just get up and then move forward. You should dedicate yourself to that paper, and then you should fight for it, and then you should give it a new life if necessary, or if you feel that whatever it has merit, work for it. I am currently, yesterday, I spent more than an hour or two, and literally, I resubmitted a paper that has been on my desk for close to 15 years. I didn't trash it because I know it's a good paper, but it has had uh, some misfortune. I'm hoping I'm keeping my fingers crossed this time it will hit a journal and whatnot. So tenacity and dedication, are also part of what we do. It's a very long process. It's a long journey. On average, every paper I published took me from conception to seeing it in the printed version or now published version. On average, it's around 5 years in my personal experience. So some of them have 1 or 2 years, some of them have 15 years. When you average it out, it's about 5 years. So it's a long journey every time. Critical thinking is definitely important to generate research. Sometimes you read a paper and you just say, this is not how it's to do. I'm going to do it better. Or you just say, whatever is written here, I don't appreciate, it's inconsistent with whatever I know, and then let me go back and let me see, if I can improve it, if I can put it into a completely different context. And so being critical of your own is important. Sometimes you go back to some of your papers and you say, gee, I could have done it much better. And then you start working on it again in a new paper. So being critical is not being critical of others, but being critical of yourself and the idea fundamentally. To be able to remain current and at the cutting edge, you need to follow the literature that you are involved in, and even more than that, others. In the past, uh, I don't do it anymore because I'm getting close to my retirement years in a few years. But in the past, I would definitely read the abstracts of major journals in my area. Anytime I would receive a copy of the journal, I would just go over all the articles and then I would read the abstracts just to keep me informed about what the main ideas were and what was being done. And if I were interested in a specific one, I would definitely read the introduction and the conclusion. And if I were really deeply, I felt that I was deeply interested, then I would read the whole article. But that essentially was one way to feed myself with what was going on, and that also gave me a sense of ideas, and that gave me a sense of the uh, what the literature is currently paying attention to. Being timely is important. Sometimes, if you are ahead of your time, a very good article may not get published, or may get published not necessarily in a place that it deserves. And sometimes being following the literature is not going to get you much either. I have a few things to say on this later on. And this is something that I urge young colleagues, young scholars to keep in their minds at all times. Research and publishing are social processes. So you are not a good researcher on your own unless you're a genius and you thrive on your own. And the number of people that I have seen with that capacity over the 4 decade period, it's limited, very limited. What I have found personally is, going to conferences or asking a colleague of mine in my department to have a cup of coffee just for the sake of uh, speaking, chatting. And I have generated a ton of ideas. I have learned a ton of things from those coffee chats, beer or dinner conversations, or conference chats that, in the halls of the hotels, you meet someone whose paper you read, and, it's your golden opportunity to introduce yourself and then ask your questions about the paper and share your ideas potentially. If the person has 5 minutes, they are usually very uh, generous with their time and they are giving. I have benefited from their wisdom quite a bit. A few of my papers literally came out of those conversations. The ideas came from those conversations and I followed them up. I showed some tenacity and dedication, and they eventually found their way to a publication. Another thing that I have benefited immensely is supervising graduate students, especially thesis students. That could be at the master's level or at the doctoral level. I still continue to do that today. And each student is a new project. Each student brings me back to my love of inquiry, love of learning new things and unearthing new knowledge, literally. And if you have a student who also has that love, then that process is really a great process, because there is also the possibility of kind of passing on your knowledge to the new generation, and it's like a heritage that you are passing, and that really matters. And eventually, you see them mature, and some of them go beyond where you are professionally. That's really a source of pride as well. So I have benefited immensely from supervising graduate students. Whenever you get a chance, don't shy from it. Take on. It's hard work, a lot of work, but it's extremely rewarding work. not necessarily from a financial viewpoint. It is from a research perspective, it literally gives you a huge amount of boost. Not during that period, for the rest of your life, because some of the things that you do there remains with you for the rest of your life, and it's something that you benefit over and over again in years to come. Another thing, this is something that I have observed in young scholars. This is something to avoid, and this is an essential point. When you start a research project that is going forward, whatever may happen, you may be teaching, let's say, 3 or 4 courses during that term. You may say, okay, I'll put this aside and then I am going to come back to that. Don't do that. If you do that, by the time you come back to it, everything in your mind would be wiped out. You will have very difficult time going back to it, restarting it from scratch. Instead, what I recommend is every day, as much as possible, just sit in front of your computer or print a copy of it, read the paper, and then correct the language if you can. Just so that, your mind is occupied with that particular paper or a set of papers that you might be working on. Half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever it may be. But keep it current in your mind, in your portfolio of ideas, and, you are emotionally attached to it. Your emotional attachment doesn't go away from that paper. Okay, so this is something I have done over the years, and I still do. And I have a file in my office. I still have some of those ideas. I keep a diary handy. What I mean by that is sometimes, you are just having a cup of coffee, or you are in a conference, or you are driving, an idea hits you all of a sudden. Human mind works strangely, and it's fascinating. So I try to find a way to write them down as soon as I can. In the past, I can't do it anymore because of aging, honestly. But in the past, when I was much younger, I remember getting up in the middle of the night, from deep sleep, and then writing some of the things, that hit me during my sleep. Uh, so keeping a record of your ideas is a wonderful thing to have. You may never get to them, but sometimes you do. If you do not write it down in a day or two or a week, that idea will disappear from your mind. It will become, noise, and you will try to remember it, and most likely you will not remember it and you get frustrated. But having a record of it is a good idea. An example that I will give to you from that angle is there is a TV program. I'm not sure if where you are, this is available, but in North America, Jeopardy is a daily competition program. It's knowledge-based, so there are competitors and they essentially answer questions. It's like a quiz question. The way it's structured gave me a sense of, this is 3 decades ago, in my first few days in the United States as a graduate student. When I was watching this, I said, oh, this gives me a sense of perhaps empirically studying the utility function concept. So I started manually collecting data on Jeopardy for a while, but then I gave up. In a few years' time, someone from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, wrote a paper on Jeopardy. You can find it. The title is Jeopardy, actually. And that opened a huge literature, follow-up literature. But I take pride, on my own as a master's student. I wasn't even a PhD student at the time. I could sense that, that particular game, that particular show would have an academic content, and and it appeared, this particular paper appeared in American Economic Review. It is the highest, most difficult journal, to publish in. So the person who published it, was a theory person, and I'm not a theory person, so I couldn't do what he did, certainly. But it just gives you momentum. It just is, yes, I have self-confidence. It really builds your self-confidence. So keep a diary handy, write your ideas. And even if you do not publish them, if somebody else does, it boosts your ego, it boosts your confidence, self-confidence, okay? But having said that, I also would like to tell you this is rather at the other end of the spectrum of having social conversations. You should try to protect your ideas, because if you have an idea that is cooking in your mind, and if you share it with people, everyone, then somebody may pick up on it, and before you get to it, they may publish a paper, and that's unethical, but that happens under highly competitive environments, and that's what I was saying before. The competition has intensified all over the world immensely over the last 3 decades. So before you know it, somebody else may be pursuing your ideas, independent of you or because of you. So if it's independent of you, that's great. You can just say, I was thinking about the same idea. But you share the idea and somebody else really picks up on it and then produces a paper that makes you, get upset with yourself and with the research process as well. So while engaging in social conversations and whatnot, try to protect your ideas until you are ready to release them publicly. That is, you have worked on them enough so that you can take ownership of your ideas, at least partially. Now, this idea, the last point here, create a research monopoly for yourself. This is something, if you can do, that will help you for at least a decade. And I have seen collecting unique data to be one way, not the only way, but collecting unique data is a common common path for creating a research monopoly for yourself. Because you have access only to that unique data set, whatever that may be. People who have interest in that data set come to you and offer you co-authorship. And you have every right to be a co-author of that paper. So the question you have to ask yourself, and given that we are living in a world of data and creating data sets and whatnot, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I can collect, I can produce that will be unique to me and that will give me a little bit of monopoly on the data set. Okay. If you can have an interesting data set that will be useful for the research questions in the literature, then that really will give you quite a bit of lift for a while until someone develops your data set, in public domain. Sooner or later, somebody brings your data set into public domain anyway. And another thing is, those of you who may have theoretical inclinations, as an academic, I highly encourage you to do that. And because with data empirical work, you have a lot of people competing for the data, competing for the methodology and whatnot. But with theory, you are usually a research monopoly most of the time. However, publishing theoretical work is more difficult, and however, producing the theoretical papers is more difficult and time consuming. So it's a risky trade-off between empirical work and theoretical work. Now, when we move to publishing your research, now that you did your research, you loved it and you produce your papers, how do you publish it? Okay, that's the second part of it. Now, of course, that's where you will find doing research is not sufficient. Doing good research is not sufficient. You really need to convince your referees. You really need to convince the editor that, what you did is good. And I had the misfortune of producing a few papers that literally hit the second or the third round of top-level journals, but I couldn't go beyond that. Okay, because editor essentially finally said, "Well, I am using my prerogative, and I have to choose, a paper out of 100 for the spot available, for the space available in the journal, and there are more promising papers than yours. I understand it's a great paper, but it's not as great as others. So writing matters at that point in time. Your ability to convince your audience is a very important thing. So, and I have found writing to be an art, but it is improved. It's not a maybe improved. It is improved. And when I look at, the things I wrote in early 1990s and what I am writing right now, I see the considerable difference. But it's a slow learning, and some of us are born with the genes that allow us to produce really better quality writing. I don't have it. It's a struggle, and every time I struggle with that, it takes me a long time to, feel comfortable with what I write. So this is something you have to pay a lot. This is something that will open the door in a journal. You have to learn how to write and how to really craft your manuscript. I have a few other things to say. Perhaps talking about this second item, I just saw this article that got published in Science recent on February 8, 2024. And I shared a copy with Fiona so she can forward you the full paper. But this is what I find very useful. It just hit home with me. It just says, this is a Chinese colleague for whom English is a second language, and I was born in Turkey, so English is second language for me as well. But this is important. Academic English is a second language for everyone, even native speakers. And getting feedback is part of the learning process. I can't say it any better. Okay? So just because English is your first language or you are fully fluent on it doesn't mean that you are writing well. Academic writing is different from writing, letters or emails and whatnot. So you really need to learn step by step, the art of academic writing. And for the best place where you can improve your skills is getting feedback from more senior colleagues. They may just, I had this, I had to go through this as a young scholar many decades ago, 3 decades ago. My early papers, I got really nailed down for poor writing. Rather than getting frustrated, I took those comments, I looked at them with a different from a different perspective, and I asked myself, what is it that I am doing wrong here? How can I improve myself based on these comments? And that has been extremely helpful because it's a learning process. Okay, so if you get feedback and that feedback happens to be not necessarily what you expected, what you hoped for, maybe that is the better set of comments that you are receiving, because there is a critical thinking that's coming your way from somebody else who has shown you kindness to read your paper and kindness to sit down and draft comments and give them to you. So we owe these colleagues a lot of thanks for taking the time and giving their time and giving their wisdom. What falls upon us is to learn from those comments, to learn from those mistakes. Okay. So that sentence right here is a very important sentence. And the learning process is a slow process. I remind my students when they get frustrated with some of the things that they are studying, but they are not necessarily comprehending, I tell them, I say, remember the time you were born. You were not walking. You were not speaking. It took years for us, to walk properly. And during that process, we had to crawl. During that process, we had to fall down several times, and it took a long time for us to take our first step. And we couldn't run immediately. We couldn't speak immediately. So learning is a slow process, and it's no different here. Learning how to do good academic writing, whether it's in English or in your language, doesn't matter, academic writing, it is a slow learning process. Some of us have the genes, or maybe we are brought up in an academic family and we have been exposed to it a little bit in our childhood. So we have a head start, early start on this process. But it's a slow process of learning. So I urge you to be patient with it. Okay. Now, having covered this point, let me just point that young scholars should pay a lot of attention and time on the introduction and conclusion segments of a research paper. Literally, this is where you sell your ideas to your audience. This is where you are either able to imprison your audience, meaning that, they are interested in your paper, or you blow the chance of keeping them interested by poor writing. So I have found abstract, introduction, especially introduction, and conclusion segments of a research paper to be crucial for the publishing part of it. Okay. The rest is usually standardized documents. You will be writing where you find the data, the methodology, the variable definitions, but where you make a difference is, introduction and conclusion. That's essentially the essence of the paper. Now, as I mentioned, doing research and publishing your research is a social process. And therefore, having an entrepreneurial spirit to reach out to others with your questions and or offers, it's part of the social process. What I mean by that is, I presume most of you are located right now in Africa. So suppose you are working on something and you have a question and you have read the paper of a scholar, feel free to email them, politely, kindly ask them if they would reach out to you with their answers. Or you can do the following. You can say, I am working on this research paper. I have this great data set, but I do not have the research experience. I wonder if you have time to collaborate with me as a co-author. You never know. They may have the time, they may have the interest, and they may find your offer valuable, and they may take it up. And you may have a co-authored paper that will give a lot of boost to your research question. So don't shy. Here is my take on it. Without asking them, you don't have a yes or no answer. By asking them, if the answer is no, you haven't lost anything relative to where you started from. But if they say yes or maybe, then you have gained something. Okay. So I would urge for everyone to maintain an entrepreneurial spirit, but do it in a collegial way, do it in a way of respect and seeking their generosity, seeking their wisdom, seeking their experiences. Okay. And this is a supplementary point is if you can actually reach out to people who are really at the cutting edge of their the field, they have their network, they have their reputation. Being a co-author of such individuals will benefit you immensely. The publications will be in top-level journals, mostly, and your name will be introduced to the field as a partner of, this great researcher with great reputation. So that's something, for you to keep in the back of your mind, Work with others. The way to get to know those others is to go to the conferences or, read their papers and reach out to them with your questions about, what you do not understand in the paper or how you may extend their paper and so on and so forth. Recently, I received an interesting email from Professor Jay Ritter, who is at the University of Florida. He is the person who literally pushed the literature on initial public offerings in the finance literature. he has been, over the decades, the most dominant and most respected researcher on initial public offerings. I had a paper with two colleagues on IPOs in Turkey recently, and Professor Ritter evidently, I didn't know that until receiving his email, evidently was asked to referee our paper. And he did. The reason why he was reaching out to me was someone from Iran reached out to him and asked for what I am asking you to do. They said we have IPOs in Iran, and Iran is just building its own financial infrastructure. So they were wondering if Professor Ritter would give them help and guide them and perhaps co-author a paper with them. He's retiring, evidently. So he said, look, I am retiring and I will not be able to finish this work. Would you kindly, take this on? So I am busy. I am right now chairing a department, so I really have very little time to take on another research project, but I found that request coming from Professor Ritter to be important. So I reached out to my colleagues in the finance department where I am. And I asked them, would anyone of you doing research on IPOs, be interested in speaking with these colleagues in Iran? And I believe there is now research going on with those individuals in Iran, and it will be a co-authored paper down the road. I do not know the rest of the story, but this is an example of essentially Iranian colleagues exhibiting an entrepreneurial spirit, and then hopefully boosting their research question at an international level. Okay. Another thing that I have seen is, as part of a social process, fashion is part of publication process as well. Sometimes you will see, some ideas being fashionable and being published over and over again in journals. But then a year or two down the road, you will never see those kinds of papers again. So you have to choose a little bit, Early on, you will need more publications in your CV. So publish versus perish statement is a very important concern for us academics. So you have to boost your quantity. Maybe fashionable research is something, even if you do not like to do it often, initially you may wish to look at what is fashionable and produce a few papers so that your CV, your productivity is established with the fashionable papers. And you can figure that out easily. If you take a look at the abstracts or the titles of the papers, or, if you go and pick up two journals, review the titles over the last 5-year period, you will see the shift in the title, shift in the focus, and that will essentially give you a sense of what is more fashionable today than before. But some research is not fashionable. That research is usually theoretical research. But there are certain theoretical constructs like efficient markets hypothesis in finance. It does, anytime you have any empirical work on efficient markets hypothesis, it will find, somewhere a home. It's not fashionable. Or the fashion is a long-lasting fashion, let's put it that way. It has been going on for 5 decades now, since late 60s. And even today, we have papers on market efficiency. There are similar ones, that you will find in economics, in real estate, as well as in finance. And when you submit a paper, if you get a rejection, don't get discouraged. I find that rejection usually a new beginning. What I mean by that is, the best example is the story of the option pricing paper that won the Nobel Prize later on. This is by Scholz and Black. They wrote this paper, and for almost 10 years, they couldn't get it published because the methodology they were, or the mathematical framework they were proposing in that paper then was unusual and people did not understand. And they did not really see the wisdom of the paper. So they repeatedly got rejected. And keep in mind, Scholz and Fisher Black, they were colleagues, they were scholars at University of Chicago or MIT or at that level. Yet their paper, which eventually won the Nobel Prize, was rejected several times. And it ultimately got published in a journal that's not a finance journal necessarily. It's a mainstream economics journal, but it's not a finance journal. It's not Journal of Finance or it's not Journal of Financial Economics. Review of Financial Studies did not exist at that time. So they had to really show tenacity. They really had to show to the rest of the world that, this is a new beginning. And everything we know about the option markets today, where hundreds of billions of dollars are trading all over the world, this paper is the underlying spirit of those markets right now. Okay, so it's a new beginning. A rejection is always a new beginning. You have to just continue to search for a new place, a new way of recrafting what you have crafted before. So that takes me to polishing your writing skills. As I indicated, technology has made writing much easier today. I understand I'm not a ChatGPT person, but I have colleagues who use ChatGPT on a regular basis. They write their papers, upload it to ChatGPT, and ask ChatGPT to provide a better writing. Well, in the old days, we would do the same thing. We would write our papers and we would take it to an English major or an editor, professional editor, pay them some money and ask them to rewrite, what we put into a context. So uh, I had it done a few times in my career. But nevertheless, today, technological advances are providing that at a much smaller cost and at any time that you wish it done, rather than at the mercy of the professional editor's time and commitments. This is something, now that I am reflecting on my life, the things that helped me improve my own writing, it has been the thing, literally, fundamentally, is reading a lot. What I mean by that is not reading a lot of academic papers. It's essentially reading a lot of newspapers, columnists, reading novels, and so on and so forth. Anytime I read a newspaper column and then I find the writing of that person influencing my thinking, I find the writing, the quality of writing, not the whatever the topic is, but the writing, the way the expression, articulation is. I literally copy some of the sentences for my future use, because they tend to give me a better way of expressing myself later on. I am not saying I am cutting and pasting, what they say. What I'm saying is I take that, keep a record of it. When I'm writing my paper, I review what they say, and I try to benefit, from that way of writing in my own way. So that has helped me, reading a lot. So if you are reading a novel, it's great. It helps you ultimately. Okay, really. And this is not just in English. Any document in any language whose language influences you, make a note of that and try to learn from its linguistic and writing structure. That's what I am trying to say. And I think this is my final point. Early on in your career, I recommend everyone to write a literature review paper and trying to publish it. Okay. Why this is important? This is important because this, you are not, you are not,
Phone rado itumira kumusha.
hello? Fiona, am I free to talk more or This is the end of it.
I'm sorry, I think somebody unmuted, but you can go on, please.
So I essentially finished my talk, but what I was saying before is writing a literature review paper, it's not that difficult. It is difficult, but it's not as difficult as writing a theory paper where you have to develop the theory, or empirical paper where you have to find the data, run regressions, and then interpret them and whatnot. This is essentially finding the published papers, bringing that together, putting the theoretical framework, and tying them together. But in doing that, you are going to be building your writing skills, okay? And what I mean by that is, don't say, paper A, did this, paper B did this. No, that's not a literature review. But you have to say, theory says this, paper A looks at this aspect of it, paper B looks at this, but, they come from different angles, yet they find the same result. So it should be an interpretive way of mingling different things together into a flow of yours, and providing new openings to the readers, for future research. You can just highlight, in my opinion, based on what I am reading, based on these discussions, this area needs, more emphasis. The evidence is not strong, or evidence doesn't exist, or theory is missing. So I did that. One of my very first papers was from my dissertation. Actually, I kind of pulled it out, put it into a review paper format. And to this day, I get, after 3 decades, I still get citations for that paper, believe it or not. And usually a good literature review finds a good home. So it may be, the beginning point of literally teaching yourself, or bringing some of the things in your genetics code out in terms of, writing skills and whatnot. That will really provide you, with a wonderful way of, starting your career as well.